Well, hello everybody. My name is Roger and welcome to my channel, Roger's Reads. So today I'm doing my August wrap-up, and as usual I've split it up into a couple of different sections or different parts. So today is going to be part one. So the first book that I want to talk about is entitled Snap by Belinda Bauer. Now this book is on the Man Booker long list, so I thought I'd give it a go, especially since it created quite a bit of controversy, being, I believe, the first crime thriller to ever make the Man Booker finalist. You know, I actually did a full review of this book on this channel, so you can check it out if you like. So the story is about Eileen Bright, whose car breaks down on the highway on a blisteringly hot summer day, leaving her and her 3 children stranded. Now Eileen leaves her children and goes in search of an emergency telephone. So the children wait and wait and wait, but Eileen never returns. And I think it was 8 or 9 days later, her body is found off the highway. She had been stabbed, and the case was never solved. So things get even worse for her kids when their father, who is unable to bear his grief any longer, goes out for milk and never returns, thus abandoning his children. So then, we fast forward 3 years to 2001, where we learn that the children are living alone, pretending to their neighbors that their father is still at home, so they don't end up getting taken into the social services system. So, having to fend for themselves, the older brother Jack, who's exceptionally resourceful, is taught the art of burglary and ends up being quite adept at breaking and entering, stealing food for him and his siblings' survival. So Jack starts to think more and more about his mother's death, and he's filled with this rage at the fact that his mother's murderer has never been found. Then one night, while cat burglarizing a house, Jack finds a clue, and his life begins to change as he slowly digs up old secrets and makes new enemies. Now what I found especially interesting about this story, especially given that it's a crime thriller, was how the author didn't rely on twists and turns to keep the reader interested and move the story forward. In fact, I figured out who the murderer was before even I was halfway through the book. And I figured, I must be wrong, there has to be a huge twist coming, but I wasn't wrong actually. There were no huge shocking twists. But then it struck me later on that the story wasn't about figuring out who done it, but rather the actual mystery was about how Jack, along with the police detectives, find a way to link the suspected killer to Eileen Bright's murder and pull up enough proof for an arrest and a conviction. And that's not to say that there weren't any surprises, because there were a couple of surprising reveals along the way. There just were no major shockers or plot twists that we often see in this genre. So I ended up really loving this story, and I really got into Jack's character, who, in my opinion, made the book. So the next book I want to talk about is entitled The Wicked Deep by Shea Ernshaw. Now this is another book that I did a full review of on this channel just a couple of days ago, I believe. So this story follows our main character, Penny, who lives with her mother on a small island in a town called Sparrow with a rather dark history. You see, 2 centuries ago, the Swan sisters, Marguerite, Aurora, and Hazel, were sentenced to death for witchcraft, even though they weren't really witches, and they were drowned by the townspeople off the shore of the island. So, since then, every summer the sisters rise from their watery graves to return in order to take vengeance on the town that wronged them. So each of the sisters takes over and inhabits the body of a local girl. So once in human form, the sisters then each bewitch and then drown at least one boy, sometimes more than one, between June 1st until June 21st, the summer solstice. So during this time, these 3 weeks in June, no boys, whether they be locals or tourists, are safe. Well, and also nobody knows which local girl is possessed, because While living in the host's body, the swan sister is able to absorb the personality, the memories, and the mannerisms of their host, so it's nearly impossible to tell which local girl is possessed. So, on the eve of the sisters' yearly return, a boy named Beau Carter arrives in Sparrow, completely oblivious to the danger he's just walked into. And of course, he runs into Penny, our main character. So, Beau and Penny get together romantically, but as we can guess, one of the sisters sets her sights on Beau, and it's up to Penny to protect him. Now, I really love me a story with dark legends, curses, and revenge, and in that regard, this book didn't disappoint. The writing of the book was also quite beautiful and lyrical, almost magical, and the author is obviously quite adept at crafting beautiful prose. Now, I will say that the book took me a while to get into, but once it picked up steam, I really got into it and I became more invested in what happened to the characters. I really love the premise of this story, and the Wicked Deep ended up being a heavy tale of revenge, murder, betrayal, and forgiveness. So in this way, it was a darker story, kind of spooky, and definitely heartbreaking in places. Oh, I also read that Netflix is supposed to be, or supposedly making, either a series or a movie from this book, so that should be a lot of fun. So the next book I read was entitled Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Hopefully you can see the title there. So this was a book that I've been meaning to read for quite some time now, and it's actually been on my shelf for a long time, so I finally managed to pick it up, and the story was fascinating. So the story revolves around Elantris, the capital of a country named Arleon. Now I know the names in high fantasy novels can be somewhat challenging, so bear with me. So anyway, the inhabitants of Elantris, they were all transformed by magic, which turned them into almost demigods. In fact, many of the people in the country revered them and worshipped them as gods. They could perform all types of magic, including teleportation and healing the residents of Arleon. Then, one day, it all went to hell. It turned sour. The magic dried up. It just simply disappeared one day. But that's not all. All the inhabitants of Elantris, the people who had magic, were now turned into these horrible, pitiful creatures that were more or less dead. Though they still retained their personality and their memories, they had no heartbeat, nor could their bodies heal. It's also worth mentioning that when the Elantrian affliction fell upon the city, the king closed the gates to the capital, trapping the afflicted people inside for good. So now, even 10 years later, people in Arleon continue to get struck down by this strange illness, and those that do are tossed into Elantris forever. So the story continues in the new capital, where one day Serene, a princess from a neighboring country, arrives to marry Prince Ryodan, the crown prince. Now, this was to be a political marriage that was to unite their two countries against the religious imperialists of a neighboring hostile country. But when Serene arrives, she is told that her husband-to-be, Ryodan, is dead. Supposedly he had died a couple days earlier. Of course, we learn in the opening pages that the Crown Prince Ryodan is struck down with the Elantrian affliction days before his wedding and is now banished for good to the city of Elantris, the city of the dead. But the king made sure that nobody discovered what really happened to his son, and as far as anybody knows, he died. But Ryodan's story doesn't end here, and we are privy to what life is like inside the walls of Elantris through his eyes, and it's really fascinating. So, Princess Serene stays in the court, even though her husband-to-be is supposedly dead, and she's determined to carry on the fight against the religious and very dangerous zealots who have conquered nearby countries. In so doing, she clashes and makes an enemy of Hyttinen, a scheming high priest of the repressive religion who recently arrived in the city. What follows is political and social intrigue as there are plots and schemes to undermine the king. There's Hrathen's plans to take over the capital, and Raoden's day-to-day trials as he adjusts to everyday life in Elantris as one who is dead yet not quite dead. But as we learn, the Walking Dead at Elantris may still have a major role to play in the new world because, as it turns out, magic didn't completely die after all, and Prince Raoden may still have an important part to play in the kingdom. So I found this story utterly gripping and enthralling and completely original, and that's all I'm going to say about it. I loved this book, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. So the next book I read in August was entitled Still Life by Louise Penny. So I've been wanting to read Louise Penny for a while now, as the people in my in-person book club just rave about her books. So I decided to finally pick a book up, and I chose the first one in the Gamache series entitled Still Life. So the story opens when Chief Inspector Armand Gamache of the Sûreté du Québec and his team of investigators are called into the scene of a suspicious death in the rural village of Three Pines, which I believe is south of Montreal. So Jane Neal, an elderly woman and beloved longtime resident of Three Pines, has been found dead in the woods. The locals are positive that it's a tragic hunting accident and nothing more, but Gamache doesn't necessarily agree and is soon convinced that Jane Neal's death was not an accident, that she was, in fact, murdered. This book had an amazing cast of eccentric, complex, and likable characters, each with more than their share of faults. There were numerous red herrings peppered throughout the story, and as Gamache deepens his investigation, possible suspects begin to emerge. By the end of the book, we've pretty much gotten to know everyone, along with their faults and foibles, in the small town of Three Pines, including the murderer. And everyone, of course, has layers upon layers of secrets that slowly come out. Now, even though many people refer to this book as a cozy mystery, I'm not quite sure that I agree with that. While it did take place in a little artsy town, there was a darker feel to it than you typically see with a lot of cozies. There was long-standing hatred, there was homophobia, there was revenge, and as it turns out, multiple murders. Though it certainly wasn't gloomy, it didn't have that light, almost playful atmosphere that you see in the cozy mystery genre. And as is the case with mysteries, one cannot say too much without spilling the beans, as it were. Let me just say that this was an enjoyable mystery that kept me guessing until the very end, and this one I did not figure out the ending. Now, the only niggle that I had with this book was the depiction of the gay couple, the only gay couple in the book. The author relied on stereotypical depictions. They ran a B&B and they collected antiques. And then there was the scene when they were singing It's Raining Men in the kitchen, which caused me to roll my eyes so hard that I saw my brain. But if it wouldn't have been for this somewhat insulting stereotyping, I probably would have given this book 5 stars. But that being said, this was a solid 4-star read for me, and I hope to continue on with the series and see what other trouble our Chief Inspector Gamache gets himself into. So the next book I read this month was entitled The Overstory by Richard Powers. This is another long list finalist for the Man Booker Awards, and the premise of this book really grabbed me, so I decided to take a gamble, and I'm glad that I did. So the book starts by introducing us to a variety of everyday people, 9 of them in fact, each with their own separate story, and all of whom has a connection to trees, though they may not all be aware of it. So we have a scientist who studies trees, a young Chinese woman whose father leaves behind a curious heirloom, a young computer genius, a Vietnam vet, and a young woman who dies and comes back to life with renewed purpose. Oh, and then there's the artist who inherits a multi-generational tree photography project, and others. At first, it seems like this is a book of unrelated short stories, which kind of surprised me given that the Man Booker, as of this time, does not allow for short story collections. But once we meet everybody in the first part of the book, we then see how they are or will become linked by the connection to trees, and in the process their lives will be changed forever. This was such an interesting approach to storytelling, linking a group of disparate characters via trees, and through this link, telling a remarkable and unforgettable story of the relationship between trees and humans. And along this way, we, as the reader, learn some pretty amazing facts about trees, data that has only recently been confirmed by scientists. Now, I recall reading about one of the findings outlined in the book several years ago, and I found it utterly amazing. So, yes, I'm an old tree hugger from way back. So the Overstory paints a vivid picture of the effects of humans on the planet and what that might mean for our future. So through our 9 characters and the poetry of Powers' writing, we dive deep into old ancient forests, the lives of individual trees, our connection to the trees, and connection to the forest, and the connection of trees to each other and to the entire planet. So there's a plethora of themes in this book. There's life, death, connection to the world around us, people fighting for what's right, greed, tragedy, our place in the natural world, and of course, hope. So after reading this book, I can say that I'll never look at trees the same way again. The book is sort of a wake-up call, a call urging us to see life from a different perspective and to try to bring back the balance in our world. Now, this is not a book with a fairy tale ending. In fact, it will break your heart, or at least it did me. But it's not completely without hope either. So the Overstory will make you angry at times, and it's definitely a story that will stay in your mind for a long time after having closed the book. It has for me, and I really don't think that I'll forget it anytime soon. So though at times it was a difficult book to read, it was one of the most beautifully written books that I've read in a long time. It was lyrical, poetic, moving, and enlightening with the potential to be life-altering. Hell, it might even make you want to run out and hug a tree afterwards. But all in all, it was a thought-provoking story, and I gave this book 5 stars. I think I'm going to stop there for now, and I will continue in part 2 of this video, probably closer to the end of the month. So that is it for this video. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. And if you like this video, I'd appreciate if you give it an old thumbs up. And that is it for this time. I will talk to you in the next video. Roger and out.